When a man goes silent, it doesn't just create space, it creates stories in a woman's mind. And those stories are rarely simple because silence speaks louder than words. Silence is often misunderstood. Many people assume that when they choose not to speak, they are choosing peace. They believe that withholding words means they are avoiding conflict, avoiding mistakes, or simply creating a pause in the conversation. But silence is never truly empty. Silence is not a blank space between two people. It is a message in itself, and that message is rarely neutral. When words are absent, the human mind does not sit quietly. It begins to interpret, to analyze, and to fill in the gaps with meaning. And in relationships, this becomes one of the most powerful and often dangerous forms of communication. When a man goes silent, a woman doesn't experience that silence as a simple pause. She feels it as distance, as a withdrawal, as a break in the connection she depends on for emotional security. A woman interprets silence not as the absence of sound, but as the presence of rejection. She begins to wonder what she did wrong, why he pulled back, what shifted beneath the surface. In that stillness, her mind doesn't rest. It races. The lack of words feels heavier than any harsh sentence could, because it leaves her completely alone with her thoughts, with no direction, no reassurance, and no anchor to hold on to. Silence also carries with it the weight of suspicion. Women are naturally intuitive, tuned to notice the small details, the shifts in tone, the changes in behavior. When communication stops, her intuition does not stop. Instead, it turns inward and begins connecting dots that may or may not exist. A pause becomes a secret. A delay becomes disinterest. A quiet moment becomes evidence that something is being hidden. And in the absence of clear truth, her imagination begins to work against her. This is not weakness. It is the way the human brain is wired to seek patterns, to make sense of uncertainty. Silence, therefore, is not interpreted as peace, but as potential threat. Even beyond suspicion, silence sends the message of indifference. For many women, words are not just expressions, they are emotional lifelines. They use communication to feel connected, safe, and valued. So when words vanish, the message received is not everything is fine, but you don't matter enough for me to share. Silence tells her she is on the outside of his world. It whispers that her presence is not important enough to deserve an explanation. Over time, this is what begins to erode trust. Not the fights, not the disagreements, but the long, unexplained silences that quietly communicate, you are not worth speaking to. For men, silence often comes from a different place. It can be a retreat to process emotions, to avoid escalation, to think through problems. But the intention behind silence does not erase the impact it has. What feels like space for one person can feel like abandonment for the other. What feels like protection on one side feels like rejection on the other. This is why silence is never neutral. It always carries weight. It always communicates something, whether that something is intended or not. One of the most profound effects of silence in a relationship is the way it quietly triggers insecurity. When communication stops, the mind does not simply accept the stillness. It questions it, it resists it, and it begins to invent explanations for it. A woman who experiences silence from the man she loves does not hear it as nothing. She feels it as a mirror reflecting her own fears back at her. She starts to ask herself questions she would not normally ask. Am I enough? Did I do something wrong? Did I lose his interest? These are not shallow doubts. They are deeply rooted insecurities that begin to eat away at her sense of worth within the relationship. The absence of words becomes the loudest signal that perhaps something is broken, and because she cannot confirm it, her imagination magnifies it. Insecurity is not triggered by silence alone, but by the meaning a woman attaches to it. She interprets it as disconnection, as rejection, as an invisible wall suddenly erected between her and the man she trusts. The silence tells her, without saying a word, that she is being left out of his world, excluded from his inner thoughts and feelings. For a woman, this exclusion often feels personal. It feels like she has been deemed unworthy of access. The mind quickly spirals. If he loved me, he would share. If I mattered, he wouldn't go quiet. If I were truly valuable, he wouldn't leave me in this confusion. And this spiral of insecurity is what transforms silence into something more destructive than anger or disagreement, because at least with anger, there are words, and with words, there is still connection. What makes this even more painful is that many times the insecurity triggered by silence does not remain contained within the relationship. It spills into her self-image, into her confidence, into the way she views her own value beyond the relationship. She may begin to compare herself to others, wondering if another woman could have kept his attention, wondering if someone else could have made him feel safe enough to open up. She begins to carry the burden of responsibility for his silence, assuming that if he retreats, it must be because she failed. And this is how silence plants seeds of self-doubt that grow into something far larger than the original moment. For men, silence may be a coping mechanism, a way to think, to process, or to escape conflict. But for women, silence often feels like abandonment. It feels like being pushed to the side, while the person she depends on emotionally chooses solitude over connection. This imbalance creates insecurity because it feels one-sided. He gets to retreat into his world while she is left stranded, waiting for answers that may never come. The insecurity is not about weakness. It is about the natural need for reassurance, for clarity, for confirmation that she still matters. Without that, silence becomes a vacuum where her fears echo louder and louder, feeding the belief that she is not enough. Silence rarely leaves a woman with peace. More often, it leaves her with questions. And questions, when unanswered, slowly turn into suspicion. The moment a man withdraws into silence, a woman's intuition begins to stir. She may not always be able to articulate what she feels, but she senses the shift. It could be a delayed reply, a sudden change in tone, or the absence of communication at moments when it was once consistent. To her, these subtle signs are not meaningless. They are signals. Silence acts like a missing piece in the puzzle, and because her mind is designed to connect patterns, she begins filling in the gaps with possibilities. Some of those possibilities are small, like wondering if he is upset, distracted, or tired. But left unchecked, they grow into suspicions. Is there someone else? Is he hiding something from me? Why is he creating a distance instead of sharing? Suspicion thrives in uncertainty. When clarity is absent, imagination takes control. Silence creates the perfect environment for this because it offers no reassurance, no explanation, no direction. The human brain, especially one that values connection and consistency, cannot simply accept emptiness. It must explain it. And so silence becomes loaded with meanings that were never spoken. A woman might replay the last conversation they had, analyzing every word to search for clues. She might revisit moments of vulnerability, wondering if she shared too much, wondering if she gave too little. In that silence, every detail of the past is put under a microscope, not because she wants to doubt, but because silence has left her with no certainty to hold on to. What makes suspicion even more intense is that women are naturally intuitive. They notice the small changes, the shift in energy, the timing of communication, the way presence suddenly feels absent, even when words are technically exchanged. So when silence creeps in, she does not dismiss it as nothing. Her sensitivity amplifies it, making her alert, cautious, and at times defensive. Her suspicion is not always about infidelity or betrayal. Sometimes it is simply about honesty. Is he being real with me? Is he hiding his struggles? Is there something he doesn't trust me enough to share? Silence plants these questions in her mind, and once they take root, they do not easily disappear. The painful reality is that suspicion triggered by silence rarely stays internal. It begins to change her behavior. She may become distant herself, testing to see if he notices. She may ask probing questions, not to attack, but to seek reassurance. She may even withdraw emotionally, creating a silent defense of her own. In this way, suspicion becomes a cycle. His silence creates her suspicion creates her withdrawal, and suddenly both are trapped in a loop of unspoken fears and unanswered doubts. What started as silence to keep peace or to buy time ends up breeding tension that words could have easily dissolved. Suspicion is not born from malice, it is born from love. It is the fear of losing something that matters, the fear of betrayal, the fear of being excluded from the truth. And silence, no matter how innocent, feeds those fears more than anything else. It becomes an empty space where trust slowly leaks out, replaced by shadows of doubt that grow darker with every unspoken word. Silence does not just stay in the moment, it creates emotional distance that lingers long after the quiet has passed. When a man withdraws into silence, a woman does not only hear the absence of words, she feels a wall being built between them. This wall is invisible, but its presence is heavy. It separates her from him in ways that cannot always be explained, but can always be felt. She may sit next to him, share the same space, even laugh at the same things, but inside, she feels far away from him. Silence creates that gap, and the longer it stretches, the harder it becomes to close it. For a woman, communication is not simply about exchanging words. It is about maintaining emotional intimacy. Words are the bridge that allows her to step into his world, to know his thoughts, to feel secure in his feelings. When that bridge is taken away, she is left standing on her side, unable to reach him. The silence tells her she is no longer part of his inner life, no longer invited into the spaces where he processes his emotions. And the absence of that invitation is what makes her feel excluded, unimportant, and eventually disconnected. Emotional distance does not happen in an explosion. It happens quietly, in the spaces where words should have been but were withheld. What makes this distance so damaging is that it feels like abandonment without closure. A fight with words may hurt, but it still affirms connection. Both are engaged, both are present. Silence, however, removes one person completely from the dynamic. It creates a vacuum where one speaks, feels, and questions while the other remains shut away. That imbalance is what creates distance, because intimacy can only exist when both people are actively participating. Without words, without emotional availability, the relationship becomes lopsided. One reaches, the other retreats. One explains, the other hides. And slowly, the one reaching begins to stop trying because it is exhausting to keep speaking into silence. Silence also transforms closeness into caution. When a woman feels repeatedly shut out by silence, she begins to hold back her own emotions. She starts questioning whether sharing will make a difference, whether opening up will only be met with more emptiness. Over time, she learns to silence herself too, not out of peace, but out of resignation. And when both sides stop sharing, the emotional bond weakens. They may still coexist, still fulfill responsibilities, still play their roles, but the intimacy, the heart of the relationship, quietly fades away. The distance is no longer just emotional, it becomes relational. They are together, yet they feel apart. Emotional distance born from silence does not appear overnight. It accumulates. Every moment of unspoken truth, every withheld reassurance, Every unanswered question contributes to it. Each silence adds another brick to the wall between them. And when that wall grows high enough, it no longer matters who speaks first, because both have forgotten how to cross it. Silence is not always a weapon, nor is it always rejection. Many times, a man's silence comes from a place of deep overwhelm. When emotions rise, when problems pile up, when he feels pressure that he cannot immediately resolve, silence becomes his refuge. For men, silence is often not about punishing someone they love, but about retreating into themselves to regain control. It is the way they process, the way they protect themselves from saying something they cannot take back, the way they attempt to stabilize an inner storm without adding more chaos outside. But while silence may serve as his survival mechanism, its impact on the woman beside him is rarely understood in the same way. Men are often conditioned to handle emotions differently than women. From an early age, many are taught that vulnerability is weakness, that showing pain is dangerous, that expressing feelings exposes them to judgment or failure. So when faced with intense emotions, whether it is anger, sadness, fear, or uncertainty, the instinct is not to speak, but to withdraw. Silence becomes their armor. It gives them space to breathe, to sort through the noise in their mind, to prepare for the moment they can re-emerge with clarity. Yet while silence soothes his overwhelm, it creates insecurity and distance for the woman waiting outside of it, because to her, silence is not safety, but abandonment. Overwhelm does not only come from emotional conflict within the relationship. It often comes from external pressures, financial stress, family responsibilities, career struggles, unresolved traumas. A man may carry these silently because he feels it is his duty to shoulder the burden alone. Speaking it out may feel like weakness, or worse, like placing his weight on her shoulders. So he chooses silence, believing he is protecting her from worry. But in reality, the silence he chooses to protect her only leaves her feeling shut out, as if he does not trust her enough to share his inner battles. This misunderstanding widens the gap between his intentions and her perception, creating confusion on both sides. There are also moments when overwhelm comes from the relationship itself. In conflict, when voices rise and emotions run high, a man may choose silence not because he has nothing to say, but because he fears saying too much. He knows that his words, once spoken in anger, cannot be erased. Silence feels safer than destruction. He believes that by retreating, he is giving space for peace to return. But while he sees silence as a form of control, she experiences it as a form of rejection. What is meant to preserve love often feels to her like withholding love. And in this gap of perception, both remain misunderstood. He believing silence is protecting the bond, she feeling silence is weakening it. Men's silence, when born from overwhelm, is rarely malicious. It is often a cry for space, for time, for the ability to return stronger. But without communication, without the smallest reassurance, the silence becomes misread. What was meant as self-preservation is received as emotional withdrawal, and what was meant as care is experienced as coldness. In relationships, silence often feels like the easiest option, but clarity is always the stronger one. Silence may temporarily avoid conflict, it may shield emotions for a short while, but clarity creates stability that silence can never provide. A single clear sentence, even one as simple as, "I need some space right now, but I'll come back to this conversation," has more power to calm the heart than hours of silence ever will. Clarity communicates intention. It assures the other person that the connection is not broken, only paused. It gives direction to the waiting, meaning to the distance, and safety to the uncertainty. Silence leaves room for assumption, but clarity removes the space where assumptions grow. Clarity does not mean pouring out every thought in the moment of overwhelm. It does not mean explaining every detail before one is ready. It simply means acknowledging presence, giving assurance that the silence is not rejection. Even small fragments of truth can keep trust alive. A woman does not need every answer immediately, but she needs to know that she has not been abandoned in confusion. When she hears clear communication, her mind does not spiral, her heart does not sink, and her insecurities are not triggered. Instead, she finds comfort in knowing there is a thread still connecting her to him, even if the conversation is postponed. That thread of clarity becomes the anchor that keeps her steady in uncertain waters. Clarity is powerful because it respects both people. It honors his need for space without invalidating her need for security. Silence often prioritizes only one side, his need to withdraw, while leaving her stranded. Clarity, even when brief, creates balance. It acknowledges that two emotional worlds are involved, not just one. When a man says, "I am not ready to talk right now, but I will when I can," he gives her something to hold on to. He gives her a reason to trust that the pause is not the end, that trust is what keeps the emotional bond from breaking during difficult moments. Silence left unexplained is interpreted. Clarity, even minimal, directs interpretation. It replaces destructive questions like, does he care? Is he leaving me? Is he hiding something? With healthier ones like, he needs time. He will come back to this. I am still part of his world. And this shift changes everything, because when there is clarity, there is no room for stories to form in the dark. The mind rests. The heart waits in patience instead of panic. The relationship breathes instead of suffocates. The truth is, words do not have to be long to be effective. They only need to be honest. A short explanation creates more security than hours of silence. A simple reassurance protects more love than retreat ever will. Clarity beats silence every time because clarity builds trust, while silence leaves trust to collapse under the weight of imagination.